So just mentioning earlier was we're looking at in learning outcome 3, primarily understanding things which are going to be related around how decision making happens within this particular sector. So we look at broadly understanding consumer decision making and the 6 different theories which have over the years been researched and proposed by different authors from the early 1950s to late 1990s. We look at that because obviously that is to understand how tourism as an activity has evolved, and over the years how the process of decision making from a consumer's perspective has also changed, and that is reflected in the study of these theories. The second bit that we will look at would be primarily focused on the fact that there's a grave importance which is given to information in the sector. So things like when we look at if you're taking a flight and the flight is delayed, the importance of real-time information, and in general how information is collected, distributed, stored, and how this is used for marketing purposes is what we will look at also understanding, because the whole process of consumer decision making is based on the model of information in this sector. So if the information is accurate, reviews, for example, sometimes help you in making a decision, but that is a key important piece of information which consumers look at, and for which they go on to certain sites to get those reviews or read reviews, and that allows them to make a decision regarding a destination, booking a hotel. And last but not the least, what we'll look at in this particular learning outcome will be to try and understand what are the new products and services which are being proposed, which have come over the years, and how they've influenced and enhanced the offering which this sector actually provides to consumers. So how has it made our lives easier? So for example, things like the use of technology. You have a flight, you can download a boarding pass or have a digital boarding pass on your phone. Now that is new technology which has enabled it, because on your smartphone you can carry an electronic boarding pass, you can check in, and all those bits and pieces of technology which has enabled the introduction of new products and services within this sector, which makes interaction and dissemination of information easier, is what we will look at towards the last part of this learning outcome. Now, before we go into this, what we've covered so far, so when we looked at looking at starting this unit, which is strategic marketing, the whole idea was that we wanted to study the role of marketing in the context of tourism and hospitality management or the sector. So here we looked at basic things like the concept of marketing, certain definitions we looked at, how it is differentiated in terms of dividing into service marketing, a bit of journal marketing management, and in general what we discussed was that within the sector everything revolves or has an element of marketing built into it. And then the example of the lobby, the front desk, the dress which everybody wears in the hotel, looking at that particular aspect, gives us a clear idea that, at some stage in every process, in every department, every activity that you see, there's an element of marketing which is prevalent and kind of interwoven in this particular sector. We looked at the concept of destination management. Certain countries, locations, cities, events that we do have become what you call related to the concept of destination marketing, how it helps grow tourism, sustain the economy, create jobs, drive, for example, numbers or increase in numbers, and then destination marketing organizations is what we looked at. Now, after all that broad concepts, we looked at getting into specifics of how marketing mix can be applied. And we looked at, when we talked about the marketing mix, we talked about the 4 Ps, 7 Ps, but the idea was to try and apply it to a particular sector. So there's a bit of a handout which I've given, which is to apply this in, say, Hilton hotels. And the idea is to understand how this mix is, how the marketing mix, when it was introduced by, say, Jerome, we look at how this is applied to kind of target, customers more effectively. So it helps us in this sector to use the marketing mix to basically target products or offerings, basis the types of customers that we want to go across to, the types of products that we look at, and then that relates to the 5 different types of concepts that we also looked at in learning outcome 1. Now, we also looked at the broad understanding of, how some of the tools within this, when we look at marketing management, there are loads of tools. How do we look at applying some of these tools and models or frameworks from a point of view of strategic nature, in terms of when a hotel, for example, looks at marketing or developing a marketing plan or a campaign, how do they apply some of these tools within the sector? So again, the example there, which was through the handout, to try and look at the application of, say, Pestle or SWOT to one of the destinations like Maldives, to understand how these marketing models are applied within tourism and hospitality sector. And then towards the end, we understood the role of social media, broadly speaking, in terms of why it has become very important, because it allows you to consume, create, distribute, and send out information in real time. Because PC is not the only device now, and post 2000, when the internet connectivity and technology became pervasive, what we've seen is that people now have the ability to be able to, deal with information, create information, or, create information by putting their views, preferences, things like that on the internet using social media, allows them to, share information, pieces of data, or, how they have had their experiences in terms of staying in a particular place, and why this has become an integral part of, all marketing departments within the sector, that when they look at campaigns, when they look at promotions, it is very vital and important for them to consider this as a channel in order to, integrate that for the purposes of communication and going across to consumers. So we've covered some parts of marketing and strategic management in terms of strategic marketing management in the first two learning outcomes. But broadly, that has been related directly, or trying to contextualize some of that bits that we study, like we look at concepts, we look at the role of marketing, we look at, for example, things like marketing mix, segmentation, positioning, all promotions. All this has been related to, tourism and hospitality sector. Now, in the third bit, we are going to study a bit more, but we will relate some part of consumer behavior. Actually, consumer behavior is a very different, subject within. When we study broadly marketing, we also study one of the aspects, and it's a subject on its own, which is called consumer behavior. Now, in the third learning outcome, we're going to dive into something called, what is consumer behavior, who's a consumer, what is consumer behavior, what is the consumer decision-making process. But again, the focus of our studies into, looking at consumer behavior would be primarily understanding this in the context of how decision-making is influenced, or made as an activity when we look at, consumers getting or customers getting hold of information with regards to, say, a destination, a hotel, an event, whatever it is. So let's look at some of the key concepts in terms of, going through some of the slides. And I've started off with picking up some of the key terms which we see in Learning Outcome 3. So if I look at, making this slightly full page now, and if I say, let's look at who is a consumer. Now, we talk about customer and we talk about consumer. Do you know what is the difference between a consumer and a customer? Can you think of anything in terms of when is a situation when we say or use the word consumer, and when do we use the word customer?
I had the impression they were kind of the same thing, maybe synonyms.
It is pretty much the same. There's no doubt about it. They are words which are used interchangeably, but slight bit of difference which we could do in terms of consumer and customer would be, sometimes when we say a consumer, when I use the word customer, what I would do is we would primarily look at saying somebody who would buy certain goods and services. So when I talk about customer, I would probably relate that to buying of goods and services. Mm-hmm. But when I say consume, the word consume and consumer, that means somebody who's looking at buying goods and services, but is maybe also the one who uses those goods and services. So a simple example of this would be In a family, for example, if you go out for a weekly shop, you might go out and buy a couple of things, milk, yogurt, bread, grocery and some of the things. But when you bring it back home, your cereals and other bits may be had by the children directly, so they would be the direct customer because they are consuming those goods. But you, as a customer, have bought those from the supermarket. So slight bit of differentiation in terms of how application of this word can be done. So when I say customer, generally is a person or are a set of people who are buying goods and services. But the ones who actually end up consuming it, that means the ones who end up actually utilizing it, using it, or making, say for example, use of it directly, we will call them as consumers. So when you look at in the case of, say, if I now contextualize this for the tourism sector, if I say lot of agencies or operators, when they advertise, they're trying to attract customers. So Thomas Cook, for example, is advertising package holidays and they are trying to attract customers. But when somebody becomes a customer of Thomas Cook and books and then has been on a holiday or has been on a, has booked a package tour and has been on a holiday by utilizing Thomas Cook services, they become a consumer of Thomas Cook, services. And then in the part and parcel of the marketing and marketing communication which happens, you're treated as an existing customer or as an old customer. That means you have at least bought these services once and utilized them directly. So a consumer is an individual who pays some amount of money or things which are required to consume goods and services. So slight bit of differentiation, but I think we use these terms very, in our natural environment quite interchangeably, often having not realized the subtle difference between the two. Now, when we talk about consumer behavior, when we talk about consumer, we want to also talk about consumer behavior and decision making. So what is consumer behavior? Consumer behavior is a set of, variables which the consumer will look at primarily and exhibit certain qualities or, traits, which we will class them as a behavior. So for example, if you're shown a couple of things and you're asked to make an opinion or asked to say, a few words, the way you behave, the way you perceive that particular product or that service would actually be determined by the behavior in terms of your previous exposure to those products, services, your experiences in the past, and that would kind of shape your behavior in terms of reacting or, providing some sort of an opinion to what is being asked for. And this study of what we take further when we look at how generally consumers would behave in reacting to or making decisions while they, say in the case of tourism activities, would be classified as something called, consumer decision making. But we are going to understand it again in the relevance and context of THM, which is tourism and hospitality sector. So this in general involves certain activities, decisions, and experiences which help satisfy consumer need and want. That is how Solomon, for example, defined what is consumer behavior. Now, it is also concerned directly with all the activities which at some stage you would be doing or performing in case of taking out a holiday package. So if, for example, let's look at you book a holiday, and when you book a holiday, you also at some point in time then look at taking out travel insurance, maybe looking at, you do a package holiday, so you might look at also booking hotels with the same company. You might look at a car hire. You might also look at, taking out some packages which will allow you to engage or get into activities in a particular location. So say, for example, you book a beach holiday. In that case, if you take out an activities package for scuba diving, some of the activities related to, that side of the vacation, they will be directly related to, you looking at making a decision because you're looking at going on a beach holiday. So sometimes you have that perception in your mind that, okay, if I'm going to, say, a city break, or if I'm going to a beach holiday, or if I'm going to, say, for example, a skiing vacation, then you will look at certain set of activities which will kind of help you decide or dictate the things that you will do in that destination. So if you're going for a skiing holiday, you would look at things like, for example, you might book a cabin. You might also look at certain activities which could be taking up lessons to do skiing. You might look at sledging. You might book the gear which is required if you don't own one, so that when you reach and go to that location for doing that activity, you have all those things available. So in a way, this particular process of decision making then starts to look at further actions that you're going to do or activities that you're going to do in that location. That whole process, if you look at it from a holistic point of view, would be then classed as a decision-making process. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So when we look at consumer behavior and decision-making, what we are looking at is the consumer looking at taking up or making certain decisions which are going to be related to the activities that you're going to do in a certain place. And some part of that decision-making process would be influenced by the kind of vacation that you're taking or the kind of holiday that you're booking. Is that okay? And that tends to follow what consumers or how consumers would kind of behave when they are looking at booking some of these packages. And that is what the tour operators, the package operators, the companies would thrive on, because what they would do is when you book a holiday, the second thing they do is they start providing you offers about booking a hotel, 20% off. Once you booked a hotel, they say, okay, 40% off on car hire. When you've done that, they will say, okay, 60% off or 50% off on this activity or that activity. So that is trying to influence your behavior to help make decisions so that you're able to maximize their revenue, and also suggest you activities which is based on the fact or the information that they're collecting, which allows them to send those services to you, and they are kind of complementary services when you're going out on a particular vacation. So that is where we will look at the understanding of what is, consumer behavior and how it is applied in the case of, tourism and hospitality management in particular, in this particular learning outcome. Now, we've discussed a lot of things about tourism. Now, tourism in some cases can also be defined as, it's a major socio-economic phenomenon. And the reason why we say this is because over the years, this sector has been growing steadily. It has been growing year on year, and there are lots and lots of people who are traveling now for tourism activities, leisure activities. So it is having a socio-economic impact on the environment, on the economies of different countries, and in terms of places where people go in for different type of activities. Now, the reason also saying that it is socio-economic is because it has created a sector which generates a lot of revenue, jobs, and also livelihoods for a lot of different types of organizations, people involved in this sector. So it could mean tour operators, tourists, which are consumers. There is a lot of legislation now being created around tourism, and we did, briefly touch upon things like sustainable tourism, eco-friendly tourism, and some of the other outcomes just for naming purposes, and then how it affects local communities. So when we look at sustainable development of tourism, this is something which is also affecting local communities. Now, having understood that this is a broad activity which is now happening at a global scale, and it has social as well as economic ramifications, what we want to be able to do is understand how the decision-making process works within this sector. And that is where the learning outcome 3 actually comes in, and we look at the studies of consumer behavior, we look at the different theories behind it, the role of information which helps consumers take a decision or make decisions, and lastly, what are the systems which are helping this sector to let customers make quicker decisions, prompt decisions, and also aid in their decision-making process. So that is where the background is in terms of, understanding learning outcome 3. Now, there are lots of different types of theories that we are going to look at, and this is primarily going to be directly related to doing some critical analysis of the different types of theories involved in consumer and decision making. Now, in general, there are some 2 studies which have been carried out, which basically, kind of put this into some sort of a mix and like a funnel, which filters down to see, help consumers in this sector make decision. So Mortino in particular and Dimanchi in particular created 2 different types of thought processes, and one of them proposed that consumers look at getting influenced. They get influenced by social and psychological views, and that kind of tends to develop their decision making, side of things. It kind of, aids in decision making on that side. And the other view was that the authors have conducted a study and they came about with 4 concepts that it says that, consumers look at making decisions if they have involvement of 4 things in terms of decision making process. 1, their ego, their loyalty, commitment, and in terms of whether it's a family going on a vacation or it's an individual going on vacation, and is that something which is going to be primarily because you are able to afford it, or is it going to be primarily because you kind of need this activity, or go out on this activity on a yearly basis. So they looked at the 4 elements, and on the other side, Mortino basically talked about social and psychological influences, which he says kind of influence consumer behavior and decision making process. Now, if you put all this into some sort of a funnel, they came up with 3 main types of things which influence consumer decision making. One is, they said, influences. So influences because of technology, for example, Generation Y, which is more influenced by social media. You look at reviews, comments, videos, and those kind of things. So influences, according to them, was very important. The second thing they looked at was key concepts which are primarily related to perception, motivation, and then some of the contents which both of them came across with things like we talk about commitment, loyalty. So sometimes when you book holidays, you book a hotel, you have memberships in place, and that is where loyalty and commitment comes in. And because you had a good experience, you will book that same location again. So there are some key parameters which they put into the mix, which also at some stage look at influencing the decision-making process. And last but not the least, context is something which came across was very important, because sometimes you look at taking holidays, and that is where the differentiation in terms of different types of reasons behind holidays have come in, that you take a holiday because of religious reasons, because of leisure purposes, because of business, because of family, so context became quite important. And this is an area which they said is under research, because as tourism as an activity is evolving, there are lots of different types of reasons which are also coming up through which, or because of which people actually make decisions. And this sometimes tends to be not an individual decision making, but tends to be a group decision making. And that is where, the concept of family decision making comes in. So when you look at going on a vacation, when you are single, you decide, and the entire decision making process is with you. But when you get married, or for example, if you're going as friends, couples, things like that, there is an individual aspect of decision making which is to be considered, because everybody has their preferences and would look at, doing things differently in different locations. And when you go out as a family, then sometimes you get to see the kids would say, no, we need to go to a vacation and there's a, theme park, or there's a water park. So sometimes there are lots of things which come into that mix, and that is where the context of why and how the holidays are booked, or say, for example, decision making is done when you're looking at the sector in general, tends to change. And this could be a simple example of sometimes friends getting together on an evening on Friday or a Saturday, and they say, okay, let's go out and have a meal. And everybody has different preferences. So if you say, we are for continental Chinese, this, that, there will be different preferences which will come up, and that is where the decision making process tends to change because of the context and a number of people involved. And sometimes you have to look at their involvement, their commitment in terms of the decision making process and how informed they are. And that is where this process of consumer behavior and decision making kind of was proposed. So there's pre-visit, on-site, and post-visit. So sometimes you drop opinions after, I think we had good food at that restaurant. No, I don't think the service was that good. It was sloppy. So what you do is you tend to create and, have experiences or come to decision making or jump to conclusions in terms of making decisions or judgments at the end of the day. And some of them tend to happen prior to the visit, some of them happen on the location, and some of them happen after you've had that holiday or after you've had that experience.
Right.
So let's look at understanding, some of the 6 different types of theories which have been proposed over the years within this sector, which relate directly to consumer, decision making and consumer behavior within the tourism and hospitality sector. Now, when we look at in particular, there are 6 different types of theories which have come across. One, is the classical prospect theory. The other is bound by rationality theory. There is contingent and adaptive theory. There is political and pragmatic, and then the last one is naturalistic theory. So what I've done is, on all these 6 different types of theories, I put together one slide each to explain the key rationale behind why this theory actually, came about. So when we look at each of these theories, will focus on these 3 aspects only, because at some stage they look at 3 or 4 different aspects of differentiating how these theories consider the decision-making process. So the first one, which is basically the classical concept, prospective and analytical decision-making theory. This was proposed by Edwards and a number of authors or research fellows who worked on this theory, and they came across, after doing some investigations, that the decision-making process, which people normally use on a everyday or a day-to-day basis, claims that they collect, analyze information, and once they collect and analyze information, at some stage, eventually they come to some sort of alternatives or decision-making criteria, which then are looked at from a advantageous, positives or negatives point of view, and then they choose the most desired objective. So sometimes, if I look at an example of this particular theory, if you're looking at choosing a destination, say example, family is going on a vacation, and the idea of choosing a location or a destination for going across on a vacation is being discussed. There are lots of different types of parameters people will come up with. They will say, okay, can we go to this place? Can we go to that place? This has, can we go on this holiday because this allows us to do this, that. So those kind of things which tend to happen in the decision-making process, which is currently being discussed, debated, and they are also eventually providing some sort of information to back up what each and everyone is saying. So if I say, let's go across to, say, a destination like Mallorca, somebody would say Santorini, somebody would say something else, then everyone is putting some examples behind it to back up that information, saying that, oh, last time I went, I had a very good time because this and this location was good, the venue was quite good, the hotel we stayed. So what they're trying to do is highlight some of the positives of the vacation in order to convince others in the group to, say yes to their option. Yeah. So in this case, it's like a collective decision-making process, and it is primarily done on the basis of, looking at discussing the positives and negatives, and then at some stage, when everybody tends to achieve, agree with the group, then what you do is you look at taking a decision.
Right.
So this was the first option which was proposed, or first kind of theory which came about, which is why it is a classical concept. The next one that we talk about is bounded rationality. Now, this one basically looks at focusing on, more realistic views in terms of how you would end up coming to a decision. And the realistic views here tend to be that, you have to base it on the basis of facts. So here, if you look at taking a decision, what you're looking at doing is that at some stage, when you're looking at taking a decision, you're not looking at making a decision on the basis of positives and negatives, but you're going to be trying to make a decision on ensuring that, whatever you have looked at are facts, and those facts kind of present a very clear choice in terms of, looking at helping you arrive at a decision. So sometimes an example here would be that when you look at going to a destination which is going to be a repeat destination for you to travel, then in those cases, what you do is you tend to kind of make decisions by looking at being a bit more rational. So, for example, if you've been to a vacation into New York, and in the first vacation you ended up spending a lot of money, you felt that we were a bit exaggerant, in terms of extravagant, in terms of spending money, taking taxis. We could have looked at organizing our travels by looking at using the tube system and things like that. and could have ended up saving money. So here, what has happened is some bit of rationality has gone into your thought process if you're considering that to go into again as a second destination. An example of that could also be that because you're going for a city break, there are so many things to see, and if you're going for 3-4 days, next time when you think of going across, what you would do is, okay, we've been to Statue of Liberty, we've been to the level 0 or ground 0, we've been here. Let's look at going to some of the other places which we haven't visited in that location. So here, some part of that decision-making process then tends to be on the basis of, facts that, okay, we've been here, we've done that. Let's look at other options or other, destinations which are available, other locations which are available in that destination for us to be able to go in and enjoy that city break again. So it is based on facts, it is based on rational views, so that what you're looking at is making a decision which is going to be based on rationality and also on the basis that these are things or activities that you've done and you do not want to look at repeating them. So here the option is to look at finding better alternatives rather than going and having the same experience again in that location. The third one tends to be, the third one which came across was contingent or adaptive decision making. So here, the focus was primarily on looking at, solving problems. So sometimes when you go into a location or you look at making a decision that, okay, we will look at doing this, then in those cases, if there are some problems which come up, say, for example, you look at, say, you booked a destination for a holiday, and sticking to that, what you tend to do at some stage would be, once you book that, but you find that some of these things or decisions that you've done based on the information do not kind of, say, come across to your expectation. So here, in this case, what will happen is you will look at, to a certain extent, going by what you've done before. So when I look at, economic or cognitive bias, what I mean by here in this theory, which has been said, is that what you want to be able to do at some stage would be to look at going with your previous experiences, which is based on your cognitive ability. That means, okay, I've done this in process, or I've done this in the past, and this led to this particular outcome. So I've read about this, for example, or let's go to this particular location because I've read about it, or, that kind of thing which steps in when you look at decision-making process. So an example here I would give is that sometimes when you go to a holiday and you haven't been there, or none of your members, have been to that location, and it tends to be new and you have not researched enough in terms of what you will go and do in terms of activities, or where all you will go and now obviously visit places in that location. What then tends to happen is, from a decision-making process, contingency and adaptive decision-making process kicks in, which says, okay, let's do this because I've read about this. Let's do that because I have heard about this from my friend, and this was a good location to go and visit, or this was a good activity to do in that location. So this kind of a thinking, which allows you to look at making decisions primarily on the basis of past experiences or experiences in general, which you've heard about or experienced in a particular location, then tends to fall into what is called the adaptive decision-making or contingent decision-making theory. So here, it is primarily based on accommodating, things which are primarily going to be related to, experiences that you've had and or experiences that you've listened to from your friends and family, and that kind of influences your decision-making in that particular location. Now, it is also called adaptive decision-making is because if there are certain things which are not going as planned, or if they are not happening as what you expected, so here what you tend to do is change your decisions on the basis of what is coming forth. So, for example, if you've taken a particular decision which has turned out to be not, which turned out to be bad, for example, sometimes what happens is, you, as friends, when you're going out, you decide, okay, we'll try out this new restaurant, or we'll try out this new thing as an activity. But what happens is, when you go in, you do not have a good experience, and you kind of, then look at, okay, I think we didn't enjoy it. Sometimes when you go, what you do is you look at the menu from the outside and say, okay, we did hear about this, but obviously I think it's not to our taste, and you make a decision, and you obviously decide to go elsewhere. So it shows the nature that depending on, because there is not much past experiences which the consumers have had on that side when you're going in a group or when you're looking at that decision-making process. Sometimes you have to look at adaptive decision-making, and that tends to be on the fly, wherein you're looking at reacting to situations wherein as you get information, you like it, you don't like it, and you take that decision.
Right.
The next theory talks about a pragmatic view in terms of the decision-making process, and this tends to be more or less a postmodernism theory, which came about in the 1980s, and there was a lot of research done up until the 1990s. And here, the view is that there is no singular reality. That means there is no particular single piece of information which allows you to make all the decisions. So sometimes you have to look at, when we talked about the context, you have to look at a lot of variables going into decision making. And here what tends to happen is that in this decision making theory, sometimes you will look at that if you look at putting in variables or context which are not related to it, you will get a decision which will primarily also be disconnected from what you're trying to achieve. So sometimes you will see that if you're having discussions among friends, what tends to happen is everybody starts to chip in, but you will also realize that some of the discussions which are happening or the ideas and suggestions being given do not directly relate to, say, for example, what is being spoken about. So you sometimes make a statement, are we not digressing? Are you not discussing what is not required? So when you look at that, it also accommodates that, sometimes some people have to step up, and in that case, they have to step up and look at a pragmatic view and take a decision in terms of, ensuring that what we are trying to discuss is what is around which that decision is actually taken. So to a certain extent, here what they propose is that if you put variables or parameters in which are not related to what is being discussed in terms of decision, and the context is not right, then you will get decisions which are going to be poor decisions, and in those cases you will need to accommodate what is called uncertainty and ambiguity when these kind of decisions are taken with regards to, say, a tourist destination or booking a destination. So this tends to be taking a pragmatic view on decision making, because what they look at is putting in a lot of context, a lot of parameters, a lot of choices, and then at some stage they expect that the decisions arrived would automatically kind of come in and meet that requirement of what is being discussed in that context. And the last one which came across was something which is called the naturalistic theory of decision making. Now, this basically focuses on the fact that when you look at taking decisions, sometimes when you look at taking decisions, you have to look at the environment, for example, where you're looking at taking a vacation, and sticking to that point. So, for example, sometimes when you look at taking a decision that I would look at doing these activities in a particular tourist location when I go, what you tend to look at is also look at working and operating in dangerous working environments. So, for example, when people look at going into a holiday in Bali, for example, or Indonesia, and they go into caves and things like that, you look at underwater. Some of these decisions might involve what is called dealing with nature and dangerous work environments. So here, the decision making also tends to be adaptive. And in some cases, when we look at that process of decision making, what you will see is that here the decision making is left to individuals and to groups when they are doing those activities. So, for example, if you're going to be looking at doing a bungee jumping, as a group of friends, if you've gone to a location and there's one of the activity which is bungee jumping, what will happen is here the decision is going to be left to individuals, even though you're traveling as a group. So I might not feel comfortable in doing a bungee jump, but some of the other colleagues of mine in that group where we are traveling together might feel comfortable in doing or taking that as an adventure and taking the plunge in doing a bungee jump. So here, sometimes you'll have to look at decision making, which will happen, from a point of view of the operating environment, and also is then left down to individuals. And sometimes there would be group decisions. So if you're going together on a holiday, if, for example, you're on a backpacking holiday in Australia or going to a Kenyan safari, you booked it as a package. There is no way that individual options could be looked at, and then this tends to be a group making decision. But when it comes to dangerous working environments, when I say is that there are some activities that you do in that location, then within a group also you allow individual decision making to happen, and that is why this particular view looks at the aspect of naturalistic decision making, which tends to involve when you're looking at taking when you're taking a holistic approach of making decisions, when individuals and groups are involved with regards to doing certain activities in a location. So some part of this theory, there are 6 different types, and over the years, the reason why they've been described as different types is because they relate and provide for different situations, and there is no one theory which kind of precedes the other or says that this is the most important theory, but these are theories which are generally studied in the context of tourism and hospitality management, and how decision-making process typically tends to happen when we look at the process of consumer decision-making within the tourism and hospitality sector. Is that okay?
Yeah, we could say that. Could we say that some of these decision theories also interconnect with each other sometimes when you try and make decisions?
Yes, they do. They do. So that is why when we look at talking about these theories, there's no one particular theory which can be applied to a particular situation. There could be a combination of these which are applied, but it helps you understand how the conventional decision-making process takes place, depending on when you're traveling in groups, traveling as individuals, type of activities that you're doing, locations that you're choosing, and how the whole process actually works. When, from a marketer's point of view, you look at understanding and segmenting customers in terms of the kind of destinations, activities, for example, cultures they come from, and when they are looking at making decisions on tourism and tourism-related activities.
Right.
Okay. Now, the second bit that we want to look at is the importance of information. So, what is the importance of information when we look at tourism activity in general? Now, here what we want to understand is, again, from a point of view of broadening the concept. When we look at marketing, there's lots happening within this sector, and marketing as a subject within this sector is also evolving. That means it's changing, quite rapidly, and the way in which some of the concepts of marketing are applied within the tourism and hospitality sector are also changing over a period of time. Now, this is evident in the fact that we see the marketing mix when there were 4 Ps. At some stage, there are other Ps which have been included. It's become 7. Now there are 8 Ps and also 9 Ps of marketing. Now, the reason why this is happening is because as the context and the environment is evolving, the concept of how marketing and marketing-related activities which are being done in this sector and its implementation is also evolving. So when we look at the whole process, marketing, and we look at definitions which were done by, say, Kotler, some of the key marketing, people who are considered as marketing gurus. And if we look at the definition in 2003, which he did, he said it's a social and a managerial process by which individuals and groups obtain what they need and want through creating and exchanging products and value, exchanging products and services, which in some cases, if somebody is selling and somebody is buying, is creating value because you're buying products and services in exchange for money. And this process over the years has now, this definition over the years has now evolved into a process which allows marketers, organizations, businesses to identify and then supply consumers with what they need in terms of, information to make decisions. So over the years, it has always been a process, but how this process is evolving when I say the process of marketing is that we do generally see that it is used as a tool or as a process to provide information to consumers. And this process, when I say provide information, also provides for ways in which information is pushed out, or when I say supplied, is channels which are used to reach out to consumers in providing this information. So when I say channels, what I mean by is that you send out catalogs, you send out promotional flyers, you send out newsletters, you have mail drops which happen through your post box in the house. You look at advertising on television, billboards, loads of other things. So this channel through which the information is pushed out to consumers, which helps them in making a decision, is the whole process of marketing, which is evolving, and we see this evolution happening. So if I go 30, 40 years back or 50 years back, when we looked at the process of marketing, it was that most of the marketing was done primarily in retail stores or on the high street. But if we fast forward into 70s, into 80s, things like catalog marketing started to come across, print and advertising started to come across, as people were able to get information through newspapers, articles, and anything which was in the printed format. You fast forward to 80s and 90s, billboards and other kind of mediums started to come across as the infrastructure got developed, the roadside and things like that. You see advertorials and other bits coming across on billboards, message boards and things like that. Fast forward to the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, you see the connectivity and internet becoming accessible, websites started to come across. And if you see post 2009, 10, or post 2000, I would say 8 or 9, social media has become quite important, wherein this process of reaching out to customers is now more dependent on reaching to consumers directly through the mediums of social media. So the whole information, I would say, flow, which is facilitated through the process of marketing, is basically being now done through different channels. And what we see is a revolution of channels which are happening over the years. And if we see every decade, after every decade, we see new channels coming out, and that is where marketing is having to adapt to incorporate these channels into, the flow of information. So as a restaurant manager, for example, or as a hotel manager, if you're responsible for marketing, what at some stage you would do is you will consider and exercise the use of different types of channels to reach out to customers. So it would be internet, you'll have a set specific budget for internet, social media adverts, online advertising, you'll have a set specific adverts for magazines, wherein you would put the placement of your adverts. You look at maybe print, so you'll have a print, you'll have a bit of I would say radio and TV advertising is the budget for it, and social media. So there are different channels through which you are looking at, pushing this information out, and that is where the role of information is becoming important. Because if I go back to the 70s, the only way information could have been pushed across was when you were at the retail store or maybe at some sort of a shop where you had the opportunity to interact with the product or get hold of information. But if you fast forward that to the 1990s, you had various forms through which you could interact with that information. But if you fast forward to 2000s, the late 2000s, you had other opportunities through websites, social media, through which you could interact with information. So information in general has become quite important, within the sector, because information allows information at the right time, I would put it this way, through the right medium and with the right context, allows consumers to actually make decisions in this particular sector. It's generally true for other sectors as well, but sometimes getting hold of the information on time and through the right medium helps you make a decision. And when I say this in the context of, there are lots of holidays being advertised. You have something in your mind wherein you want to go across to, but Jet2 Holidays is advertising it, Thomas Cook is advertising something else, Virgin Holidays is advertising something else, British Airways is advertising something else. But what tends to happen is, in your decision-making set, maybe Jet2 Holidays steps in is because this is something which is related to what you had in mind. And that is where sometimes decision-making can happen quicker, because what they are talking is actually synchronizing with what you had in mind, or they are talking your language, isn't it? So when you see that is where the importance of information becomes important. So every year, a lot of these package operators, when we look at, they try and bring across different destinations offer different type of packages or holidays, but you only listen in or tune in your conscious actually starts to tune in only to a specific type of destination for marketing, is because that is where your conscious is actually thinking of going. So if you're thinking of a particular type of holiday and there are lots of adverts that you see, you only get attuned to the type of advert which actually is relating to what you have in mind, or sometimes in your subconscious mind that this is what I have or I'm looking at planning. So information is quite important in this sector, and what we need to be able to understand is that how do marketers in general use information and then kind of repurpose this to reach out to consumers and provide information in a way which will further forward the process of decision making in their favor. So a broad thing that we want to look at when we look at translating some parts of this into what do you call when I looked at mentioning the ATHE model in the beginning, in the first learning outcome, we talked about awareness leading to information, leading to desire, leading to action. What we want to be able to do is understand what are the various activities which people do within this sector from a marketer's point of view, and how does it relate to a particular task or function from a marketing perspective. So when if I look at drawing your attention towards the table, which is saying identifying consumer needs. So how do you identify consumer needs? At some stage, most of the organizations will have to get down doing some research. Whether this product is required, whether this has a requirement, is there a demand for this product? If there are other products available from competitors in the market, what are their price points? Why would they buy your product? How would you create a USP or differentiate your product from other competitors? It is all related to identifying consumer needs, and this can only be done by doing an activity which is related to, market research. That means you have to collect information which is already there in the market, and that has to be done through the mode or activity of something called marketing research, right? Now, when we look at how do you analyze marketing opportunities, when you have some bit of information which is being collected through research, what you then try to do is collect that data which you have collected in the form of questionnaires, information. You try and purpose that data into what is called information. So it starts off by a simple example which I would give here. If you go and shop in a supermarket, or you have a loyalty card, so every now and then when you shop, they swipe your loyalty card. Now, what is being stored in that loyalty card is every time you go into the supermarket and what kind of products you're buying, what is the size of your basket, the money that you're spending, things like that. But at some stage, somebody in the organization in the background who's getting all this data is actually converting this data into some sort of meaningful information. And that meaningful information would be, what are the key kind of products that you buy in every shop that you do? So you're buying a bit of grocery, it could be milk, eggs, bread, and this is something that you buy in every shop that you go. So over a point in time, when they collect that data, analyze it by converting it into information, when I say information means some reports, they will see consistently what kind of products you're buying. And that consistency would allow them to do a bit of segmentation and provide you with certain offers. So they would say, on an average, this customer, and that segmentation tends to happen on a demographic basis, psychographic basis, behavioral basis, 4 different types of segmentation. So that segmentation would say middle income customer, between 25 to 35, normally shops for this, and they put you into a bit of segmentation, which will then at later stage allow the product planners to send out offers and, promotional things to you via the channel of marketing. So translating needs into product would then allow those information to put you into a bit of segments, or try and kind of define what kind of a target audience you are, what kind of things you generally buy, and what kind of products you're buying would help them understand what new products they need to position towards you when they look at sending out promotional offers. At some stage, they would then also look at converting this information into something called knowledge. Now, when I say knowledge, what is the difference between data raw data, which is basically raw information, which has got probably no meaning because it's organized in terms of, just being stored in terms of, and it's not organized. But when I organize that data into some sort of meaningful reports or, charts or graphs or data, which allow me to understand that if I want to say Peter shops in, say, for example, Carrefour throughout the year, how much does he spend in Carrefour as a supermarket? So all the data which has been stored in loyalty card is data, but when I convert that into some sort of a meaningful information to say, okay, your shops across the Carrefour has been, say, 4,000 euros for the year, example. That gives you some information now, and because the data has been organized into, meaningful conclusions or meaningful outputs. At some stage,
they're trying to find it. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say they're trying to find a pattern in the consumer's behavior, and then they're making the services. So it's just a pattern.
Correct. Yes. So at some stage, what they want to then do is, if this is being looked at from a general manager's perspective, a product planner's perspective, what he wants to know is, what is the, if I do, say, an average 50 euros of weekly shop, what is the biggest spend in that weekly shop? That is knowledge that you need from that information now. Or what is one product which you bought frequently across as many shops as you've done throughout the year? Now, that bit of information is knowledge, and that allows product planners or people who are basically looking at sending out promotional offers, marketing offers to you, allows them to understand that this is a particular thing that we need to send across to this consumer because he would have a chance of taking up this offer because they have some experience from your past data, information, and how you've shopped in the stores. So here the idea of, getting into understanding this is that information plays a very key role when we look at decision-making process. And this specifically is quite important within the tourism and hospitality sector as well, because if you had a good experience, you had a good holiday in terms of, going there previously, and all the bits of data which they've collected in terms of the food that you've ordered, the money that you've spent, the things that you've used in the room, the kind of activities that you've done, all this is meaningful information, which at some stage allows the marketers within the tourism and hospitality sector to create offers which then go out to consumers in order to bring you back to their ecosystem for spending. And this then is use of information in the context of, marketing when we look at this sector in particular. Now, if I have to put this into a bit of process, what is happening is all organizations, all businesses have some sort of information management systems. Because of coming in of technology over the years, most of this data was initially stored, on paper. So you had to do a survey, bookings were done on paper, all that. But when technology, computers became available, some part of this then started to be stored electronically. Sorry. And when you look at this information being stored electronically, that also meant that this could be retrieved much more quicker than primarily having to search through a number of registers to find out you had stayed with us in 1987, then 1990, but at a click of a button, a report allows you to generate all this. So in order to ensure that the speed at which the information is also retrieved, what has happened over the years in this sector is a lot of money has been invested into information management systems. Is that okay? Because information is important. It is the primary source from which all activities originate, whether it's marketing or anything within the marketing activity. So it is important for the organizations, businesses, different type of people which are involved in this sector to have something which is called an information management system. And the information management system in this case, is utilized by everybody. So it could be destination marketing organizations, people who sell products and services, if you have to retrieve or store competitor offerings, what kind of promotional offers have been run in the past by Thomas Cook. If they want to look at, are they repeating a promotion? Was it more successful? What were the prices? What kind of activities were around that particular promotion? So all this is then helpful if there is some sort of a central storage in which you can store all this and retrieve all this at a click of a button, and that involves the use of what is called the information management systems. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, that process of how it is managed in an information management system. So when you have the information, you can do analysis, you can do, you can feed in new requirements, you can look at designing the format of different types of reports, you can look at collecting data in a way which allows you to develop certain aspects of, understanding the consumer. And at some stage, some part of this is primarily implemented across different locations, different branch offices, or different, if you're a hotel chain, across different hotels, because it allows you to manage the process centrally. So information management systems allow and have provided a lot of advantages within this sector, because information tends to be the key for all activities which kind of start off within any business, and specifically so in this business as well. Now, at some stage, we know that, okay, information management is happening. So at the front desk, customers are checking in, checking out, bills are being processed, invoices are being generated, payments are being taken. That's all fine. But the general manager of that hotel, how would he make sense of that information? So information management systems then got more intelligent, and they were then called the MIS, Management Information Systems, or Strategic Management, SMIS. And these systems allowed managers, management, senior members in the company or the organization to look at making decisions on the basis of what was being collected. And over the years, this evolution of information systems, IS into MIS, Management Information Systems, has allowed interactivity of departments to also happen. So at a click of a button, there were lots of different independent management information systems. So when we look at a PC being used at the front desk, which was a standalone PC just for checking in, checking out, generating invoices, a dot matrix printer connected to it to generate your invoice a couple of years back, I think 20 years back, was a single computer. But when the networks were introduced and everything involved networking, and all the PCs in the hotel, all the systems were connected, that meant that at a click of a button, you could get information from the laundry department, from the restaurant, from other places. And this allowed the distribution of information to happen, but also at the same point in time allowed the information to be stored centrally and retrieved centrally, and could be utilized for making, strategic decisions by people in management. So that bit, look at again the evolution of information systems happening within the sector, and it has also happened in other sectors as well. So manufacturing, engineering, look at any other sector. Now this particular slide, basically the image that I want to show here is, which summarizes it all, talks about the type of information which is being created by tourism activity and people involved within this activity. So if I look at, in general, if I say tourism is a system, what we have is a lot of different types of people contributing, information within this thing, within this system. So you look at ecological, which is the environment. Environment could be technological. You have social, political, and economic environment, which is actually contributing some information into this. Now, when we look at tourists in particular, certain type of activities that they do, bookings, things which are related to what they utilize, create, and generate information fall into that. And when we look at a hotel or an organization which is providing a lot of products and services to tourists which are coming in and staying in for accommodation, activity, leisure, whatever, there are lots of different types of information that they will also produce. So in general, in order to kind of look at managing and ensuring that this information is available throughout, what we do get to see over the years, the complexity of systems which have been deployed in different types of places have also increased. So when we look at standalone PCs, network PCs, we look at mainframes, what has happened in order to manage the flow of information and the kind of information which is being now produced. In order to do that, the technology has also been upgraded, and this is something which is reflective of the fact that in smaller places you have small information systems, in large places or big hotel chains you have large management information systems, and some of them employ, very advanced technology, things like cloud computing. It might have inputs which are coming in the form of, different types of data. So it could be images, pictures, video, reports, and other formats which are there. But all of that is relevant because today information is king, and every place is quite keen on gathering as much information about the consumer as possible because they want to understand the decision-making process. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, the last bit that we want to look at is we want to look at what are the new products and services which are coming in this sector, which are actually meeting the needs of consumers. So this sector is also not standing still. There are lots of different types of things being introduced from time to time, and there are lots of different type of services being introduced. And what are these services being introduced which are meeting the requirements and needs of consumers is what we need to come up with and discuss in this particular last assessment criteria. Now, one of the things which I've done is I've taken the route of, say, for example, technology in particular, which is helping to segment and also cater to a lot of different types of requirements which customers have in tourism. So when we look at global distribution systems, today as customer or as consumer, essentially, not using the word customer, but today as consumer, if you're looking at booking a hotel, you want to be able to see what are the rates and prices of different types of rooms and other bits and pieces across a range of hotels if you're going to a particular destination. So in those cases, the use of global distribution system sites like booking.com, travelsupermarket.com are becoming important because at one location, you're able to get hold of all the information related to, prices, types of rooms, availability in a particular location.
Yeah.
Centralized reservation systems, cloud computing, and availability of virtual tours on websites is some of the new products which I can think of, which are now coming up in terms of requirements to meet, there are new types of products which are or technologies which are coming up in order to meet the, requirements and needs of customers within this sector. Now, can you think of a few yourself in terms of what do you think are the new products and services coming in this sector which are going to keep the consumers engaged and look at meeting their requirements?
I can't think of anything on top of my head right now. I was thinking about the online travel agents so far and the distribution system that's helping, that's making things more convenient. And the smartphones and connectivity that we have.
I totally agree. So here, what we need to do is, in this particular task, you might, there are lots of things which are there, but I would suggest in order to do this particular task, when you do the assessment, it will be good to look at focusing on one product, and that is what you could explain with regards to how is it new and how it meets the requirement of, customers in that location. So if it's a restaurant, if I look at the reason why I looked at, say, for example, restaurant, if you see some of the restaurants have now introduced electronic menus, and menus are, provided or given using, tablets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is a new technology which has come up. So what I've done in this particular task, in order to address it, I've just kind of narrowed it down to the use of technology. And that's why I've written these 4 or 5 different bullet points, because if I just look at technology, it gives me a few ideas in terms of what's happening within the sector. Now, we could look at different types of innovations which are happening in terms of hotels, in terms of how to being done, or how the infrastructure in the hotel is being done. But technology was an easy outlet for me to, kind of just think of some points related to what are the new things which are happening within the sector. So maybe pick up one such example, and that is what you'll need to explain in order to do this particular task, which says propose new products or services to meet the needs of tourism and hospitality consumers.
Mm-hmm.
So if I look at restaurants today, I think one of the things, if I just look at an example of restaurants today, some of the restaurants that you see have introduced a vegan menu.
Right.
Right. Now, this wasn't probably something which was on the agenda in a lot of locations, but most restaurants today, because of the growing demand and trend for people becoming vegan and taking up taking up vegan habits, I think in order for them to now not turn away business or turn away customers in this case, they have started to introduce at least some options on the vegan menu.
Right.
This is a new product or a service which most restaurants are having to introduce. Keeping in mind there are customers and the demand for veganism is actually on the increase.
Yes.
So here in this particular learning, task in task 3.3, not the learning outcome, task 3.3, you have to think of one particular service and basically explain that.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, in order to basically study this particular learning outcome, I've got one. Obviously, I'll put the presentation on the Moodle in a couple of seconds just after this session. But what I've also got is one or two handouts which would help you, study. I would say, the consumer decision-making theories.
Yes.
And so I've taken some part of it from there. So basically the process in terms of, what the theories are, how they were introduced and what are the bases is a handout which I'll include. It's a good read. And the other bit that I would also look at doing would be, the contemporary issues, which is in terms of marketing. So when we look at, I've taken up information in particular and how it helps in the decision-making process. This is a 4-page handout, and from which I've taken this particular table. Is a good read.
Okay. Cool.
Right. So these two, along with the presentation, would help in terms of understanding this particular learning outcome, which is looking at consumer decision making theories, basis on the basis of which consumer decision making happens, the role of information, and then the third part is to primarily look at picking up one service which will help complete this task by saying that okay, this is a new product or service which is coming in, which actually meets the demand of consumers within the tourism and hospitality sector.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Good stuff. So with this, obviously,